Los Angeles wasn't exactly what I had imagined. Sure, it had the glitz and the glamour, the palm trees swaying over Sunset Boulevard. But underneath all that, there was something off. Like a city wearing too much makeup, trying to hide something underneath. I had been in town for barely a week when Vincent Devereaux found me. He was one of those men who walked into a room and made it feel 10 degrees colder. Sharp suit, slicked back hair, and a presence that could command an entire room without saying a word. He saw me at a networking event, one of those overpriced industry parties where everyone pretends they already made it. I was sipping cheap champagne, trying to act like I belonged, when he approached me. "You've got something," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "That thing no one can teach." I almost laughed. Me? I had been auditioning for student films and background roles just to pay rent. But when Vincent Devereaux tells you you've got something, you listen. He slid his card into my hand. Black embossed lettering. No email, no website. Just a number. "Call me. I'll make you a star." I did. Of course I did. The next day I was sitting in his office, a massive glass-walled corner suite in Beverly Hills. The view stretched over the city like it was his personal kingdom. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. Something I couldn't quite name. Like the air was thinner. He wasted no time, no small talk, just business. "You want this?" he asked, sliding a contract across the table. "Real fame? The kind that lasts?" I hesitated. The paper felt heavy in my hands. I was about to skim through the fine print when he leaned forward, his blue eyes locked onto mine. "Emily," he said, my name sounding almost foreign on his tongue. "All great stars have one thing in common. They don't hesitate." So I signed, and everything changed. At first it was everything I had dreamed of. Suddenly, doors that had been slammed in my face were wide open. Casting directors actually returned my calls. A producer, big producer, offered me a role in a new psychological thriller. No audition needed. My face was on industry blogs. Vincent had made good on his promise. But then, weird things started happening. It was small at first. I'd wake up and find things in my apartment that weren't mine. A pair of gold earrings in my bathroom. A lipstick shade I'd never wear sitting on my vanity. I assumed it was Sophie, my best friend and roommate, borrowing my stuff. Until I asked her, "Emily, I haven't been here all week. I told you, I'm staying at Ryan's." Then there was the mirror. I had this old vanity mirror in my room. Vintage, Hollywood style, with those bright round bulbs around the edges. One night, I caught something in the reflection. Not just my own face, but something else. Distorted like a smear of wet paint in the shape of a person standing behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Just my empty bedroom. I laughed it off. Maybe I was tired. Maybe my brain was playing tricks on me. Until the next night. This time, the reflection didn't just look distorted. It looked wrong. My own face. Twisted. Stretched. Like something was wearing my skin but hadn't figured out how to fit inside it properly. I didn't sleep that night. Then people started disappearing. First, it was Cara Lopez, an actress I had met at an event last week. We had exchanged numbers, talked about grabbing coffee. One day she was all over the entertainment news. The next, her name was wiped from everything. Like she had never existed. I mentioned it to Vincent. "People come and go in this business, Emily. Don't get too attached." His voice was calm. Too calm. Something was very, very wrong. I told myself I was overthinking. Hollywood was fast-paced, brutal. People disappeared from the industry all the time. Careers ended overnight. Maybe Cara just quit. But then it happened again, and again. 3 actresses I had spoken to at different events, gone. Their social media accounts erased. No news, no scandals, just vanished. And the things in my apartment kept getting worse. One night I came home from a late shoot to find a dress hanging in my closet. A dress I didn't own. It was old-fashioned, vintage, with a wine-colored stain on the hem. I touched it and I swear to God my vision flickered. like a TV on a bad signal. For a split second, I wasn't in my apartment. I was somewhere else. A room drenched in red light. A woman stood in the corner, her face obscured by shadow, whispering something too fast for me to understand. Then in a blink, I was back in my bedroom. The dress was gone. I barely slept. The next morning I got a call. "Emily?" A man's voice. Nervous. "My name is Nathan Briggs. I need to talk to you. It's about Vincent Devereaux." I hesitated. "He's not what you think he is," Nathan said. "Meet me at the Roosevelt Hotel, midnight, and don't tell anyone." I almost didn't go. Almost. But something inside me knew I had to. The Roosevelt Hotel was a relic of old Hollywood. Gorgeous, haunted, the kind of place where legends never really die. It felt right that we were meeting there. Nathan was waiting in the dimly lit lounge, looking over his shoulder every few seconds like he expected someone to drag him away. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into," he said the second I sat down. "Then tell me," I said. Nathan pulled out a folder. Inside were photos, actresses from decades ago, headshots of women who had been on the verge of making it big. All of them had worked with Vincent, and all of them had disappeared. He finds girls like you, promises them everything, and then they vanish, not just from Hollywood, from existence. I swallowed hard. That doesn't make sense. If this were true, someone would have noticed. Nathan pulled out a newspaper clipping. "Read this." I scanned the article. It was about a rising actress named Eleanor Shaw, missing since 1974. The last person seen with her? Vincent Devereaux. I felt sick. Nathan leaned in closer. "I've been tracking this for years. Every decade, Vincent finds a new it girl. He makes them famous. And then when their star is about to shine the brightest, he takes them." I wanted to argue to tell him he sounded insane, but I had seen things. The mirror, the dress, the faces that weren't my own. I wasn't sure what scared me more, Nathan's theory, or the fact that I was starting to believe it. And then my phone buzzed. A text from Vincent. "Emily, where are you?" I looked up at Nathan, my hands shaking. He knows. I didn't reply to Vincent's text. I wanted to believe that if I ignored it, he wouldn't know where I was. But deep down, I knew better. Nathan saw the fear in my eyes. "We have to go. Now." We left the Roosevelt through the back exit, slipping into Nathan's car. My heart was pounding so hard it drowned out the sound of the engine. "We have to get you out of LA," Nathan said, speeding down Sunset Boulevard. "Vincent won't stop until he gets what he wants." I turned to him. "And what is that?" Nathan hesitated, gripping the wheel tighter. "You." Something cold settled in my stomach. I looked out the window, watching the neon lights of Hollywood blur past. The city felt different now, less like a dream, more like a trap. Then the streetlights flickered. One by one they snapped off, swallowing the road in darkness. The air thickened, pressing down on me like I was underwater. Then, Nathan slammed on the brakes. A figure stood in the middle of the road. Vincent. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to just appear like that. Nathan cursed under his breath, reaching for something under his seat. "Stay here." He stepped out, his hands clenched into fists. Vincent didn't move. He just smiled. Then, Nathan collapsed. I screamed. One moment he was standing. The next, he was on the ground, his body twisted in a way that wasn't natural, blood pooling beneath him. Vincent turned to me. "I told you, Emily. Great stars don't hesitate." The car door unlocked on its own. I didn't want to move, but something inside me, something deeper than fear, was pulling me forward. I stepped out. Vincent tilted his head, studying me like I was a rare artifact. "You've seen them, haven't you? The ones before you?" I swallowed hard. What are you? His smile widened, but his eyes stayed dead. Hollywood is built on sacrifices, Emily. Legends don't fade, they feed. I understood then. The missing actresses, the whispers in my apartment, the reflections that weren't mine. He wasn't just a man. He was something ancient, something that had been pulling strings in Hollywood for decades, maybe longer. And now, he was offering me the same choice. Fame, real fame, the kind that never dies, but at a cost. I could feel it, crawling under my skin. The hunger, the thing that made legends untouchable, eternal. All I had to do was say yes. I looked down at Nathan's body, his blood seeping into the cracks of the pavement. Then I looked at Vincent, and I ran. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs almost gave out. I didn't stop until I was miles away, lost in the dark streets of Los Angeles. Vincent never chased me. He didn't have to, because I knew, no matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, Hollywood always calls its stars back. And someday, when the cameras are flashing, when the world is watching, I'll see him again, waiting, smiling, because legends don't fade, they feed. Moving to Los Angeles felt like stepping into a dream. The moment I landed at LAX, I could practically hear the city whispering promises of fame and fortune. I wasn't naive. I knew making it in Hollywood would be brutal, but I was ready. I found an apartment ridiculously cheap for the area. 7265 Sunset Boulevard, a decaying, sun-bleached building sandwiched between a boarded-up liquor store and a sketchy pawn shop. The landlord, a frail man with yellowed teeth, barely made eye contact as he handed me the keys. "People don't last long here," he muttered before disappearing down the hallway. The apartment itself? Barely livable. A single window overlooking the alley, outdated appliances, and a weird metallic smell hanging in the air. But I didn't care. Rent was dirt cheap, and I had auditions lined up. That first night, exhaustion hit me hard. I barely got my sheets on the mattress before crashing. Then, around 2 a.m., something woke me up. A faint scratching sound. At first I thought it was rats, but the noise wasn't random. It was rhythmic, like someone tracing their fingers along the wall. My heart pounded as I held my breath, listening. Then, from inside the walls, a whisper. "Help me." I sat up so fast I nearly fell out of bed. My brain scrambled for a rational explanation. Pipes, a neighbor watching TV. Anything but what it really sounded like. I turned on my bedside lamp and scanned the room. Empty. The noise stopped. For the next few days I tried to ignore it, but it only got worse. The whispering became more distinct, sometimes calling my name. I'd catch shadows shifting in the corner of my eye, but every time I turned there was nothing. Then came the dreams. Vivid, suffocating nightmares of people trapped inside walls, their hands clawing at the plaster, their eyes wide with terror. I'd wake up gasping, my sheets damp with sweat. I started asking questions. My neighbors barely spoke to me. They avoided eye contact, doors shutting in my face. One night, after another failed audition, I ordered groceries. The delivery guy, a scruffy dude about my age, paused before handing me the bags. "You live in 76-5? His face paled. "You should get out while you can." My stomach twisted. "Why?" He swallowed hard. "People disappear there. Always have. And no one ever talks about it." That night the scratching returned. But this time it came from the apartment next door. The apartment that had been vacant for years. The noise was coming from apartment 6, right next to mine. I knew for a fact that no one lived there. The landlord told me it had been empty for years, but now... Something inside was scratching at the wall, slow and deliberate. I pressed my ear against the surface, my breath shallow. The air smelled stale, mixed with that same metallic scent I'd noticed on my first night. Then 3 knocks. I jerked back, my pulse hammering. Someone was knocking from inside the empty apartment. I bolted out into the hallway. The building was dead silent. No flickering TVs, no muffled conversations. Just the hum of the streetlights outside. I stared at the door to apartment 6. The paint was peeling. The numbers rusted. My gut screamed at me to turn back, but my hand was already reaching for the doorknob. Unlocked. I hesitated. Every horror movie I'd ever seen screaming in my head. But curiosity won. I pushed the door open, stepping inside. The air was heavy, thick with dust and something rotting. Furniture sat untouched, covered in layers of grime. But what caught my attention was the far wall. It looked off. The wallpaper was newer, fresher than the rest of the room. And in the dim light, I swore I saw a slight bulge, like something was behind it. I took a step closer. That's when I heard it. A faint exhale, like someone standing inches away, watching me. I spun around, heart pounding. The room was empty, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Something was in here with me. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I turned back to the bulging wallpaper. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to reach out and press against it. The wall gave under my touch. Soft, almost like skin. My stomach churned. I grabbed a pocket knife from my back pocket and sliced through the wallpaper. The second the fabric peeled away, the smell hit me. Rotten flesh. I gagged, stepping back as the hole in the wall revealed something buried inside the plaster. A face. Skin dried and cracked, hollow eyes staring back at me. Mouth frozen in a silent scream. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The sound seemed to wake something up. The air shifted. The room felt smaller. My phone buzzed in my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Unknown number. I answered, my voice barely above a whisper. Hello? A pause. Then, in a voice that sent ice through my veins, why did you open the wall? I couldn't breathe. My fingers tightened around my phone as the voice on the other end whispered again, slow and deliberate. You shouldn't have looked. My legs felt frozen, my brain screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. Then a creak behind me. I spun around. The door to apartment 6, the one I left wide open, was now shut. The air inside the room had changed. Thicker, colder. It felt like something had just entered. The whispers started again. Not from the phone this time. They were all around me, coming from the walls. Dozens of voices, overlapping, frantic, pleading. Don't let him take you. He's still here. Run before you disappear too. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted for the door, yanking it open and stumbling into the hallway. My chest heaved as I leaned against the wall, heart hammering. I needed answers. Still clutching my phone, I ran down the block to the only person who might know something, the old man who ran the liquor store. The bell over the door jingled as I burst inside. The owner, a wrinkled man with hollow eyes, barely looked up from the counter. You saw them, didn't you? His voice was flat, like he'd been expecting this. I swallowed hard. Who are they? He sighed, rubbing his temples. Not who. What? I stared. This place, he muttered, staring past me like he was seeing something else. It was built by a director back in the 40s. They say he held auditions here. Girls came in, but they never left. My stomach twisted. What happened to them? His gaze hardened. The walls ate them. I ran back to the apartment, my mind racing. The stories, the whispers, the faces inside the walls. It all made sense now. Those missing tenants. They never left. The second I stepped into my unit, I knew I'd made a mistake. The air was different. Wrong. Something waited for me inside. The lights flickered. Shadows moved. Then I felt it. Breath on my neck. I turned just as the room shifted around me. The walls seemed to pulse, stretching and contracting like lungs. The whispers were deafening now, and then I saw him. A figure emerged from the shadows, dressed in an old, decayed suit. His face was stretched and unnatural, a twisted grin carved into his features. Your audition begins now. The floor beneath me split open, and something dragged me down, cold, clawed hands pulling me toward the wall. I screamed, struggling, kicking, but it was useless. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me whole, my own face in the wall, mouth open in a silent scream, just like the others. Growing up in Hollywood Hills was weird. My parents weren't rich, but we lived in a tiny house tucked between expensive mansions and run-down actor apartments. It wasn't the kind of place for kids. No sidewalks, no playgrounds, just narrow, winding roads and a bunch of washed-up actors or hippies who never left the 70s. Most of my childhood was spent alone, wandering through the hills, making up stories in my head. My parents were chill, not the helicopter type. They figured Hollywood wasn't that dangerous if you just stayed away from the tourists and weirdos. Turns out they were wrong. I was about 8 or 9 when it happened. My mom picked me up from school like any other day. We got home, kicked off our shoes, fed the cats, and went through our usual after-school routine. I remember everything so clearly because of what happened next. The answering machine was blinking red. Nothing unusual. My mom pressed play while she sorted the mail. At first it was just breathing. Slow, heavy breathing. Then a man's voice, calm but off. "I see you. You look so pretty today." A low chuckle followed, then a full-blown laugh. It wasn't like the cartoon villain kind either. It was slow, dragged out, almost like he was savoring the moment. My mom slammed the stop button before it finished. Silence. I looked up at her, expecting her to freak out. But she just waved it off, saying it was probably a prank. A wrong number. No big deal. But something about the way she said it felt off, like she was trying too hard to sound casual. I wanted to believe her. But that laugh, that voice, it stuck with me. After that call, something changed. It was like a switch flipped in my brain. Every time I walked home, I felt watched. I started noticing little things. Shadows that disappeared when I turned. Distant figures standing at the edge of the hills. Movement in the trees at night. One night, I woke up to a weird sound. A soft tapping against my window. My room was on the second floor. There was no way someone could be there. Right? I pulled the blankets over my head, convincing myself it was just the wind. But I barely slept. The next day, something arrived in the mail. No return address, just a plain white envelope. My mom opened it thinking it was junk. Inside was a single photo. A photo of me, taken from across the street. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't posing. I wasn't even aware the picture had been taken. It was just me walking home from school looking straight ahead. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just some prank. Someone was watching me. Years passed. I left home at 20, moving into a tiny apartment in Los Angeles with my boyfriend Jason. He was way older than me, controlling, jealous, the whole deal. But at the time, I thought I was in love. We were broke, like living off instant noodles broke. Jason had dreams of making it big, but all we did was hang around the grungy side of Hollywood, barely scraping by. One afternoon, we were sitting at a cafe on Sunset Boulevard, drinking coffee we could barely afford. That's when I noticed him. A man, mid-40s, sharply dressed, expensive watch, clean-shaven. Not the usual Hollywood burnout. He sat alone at the table next to us, but he wasn't looking at his phone or reading a menu. He was looking at me. After a few minutes, he leaned over, smiling. "Mind if I join you?" Before I could answer, he slid into the seat across from me and pulled out a cigarette, offering one to me. I hesitated, but Jason shot me a look, so I took it. The man lit it for me, watching my face like he was studying every detail. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice smooth but thick with an accent. "German, maybe?" "I'm a photographer. I shoot for major agencies. You'd be perfect." He tapped his camera on the table like he needed to remind me it was there. It felt forced, like a prop. "Really?" I asked, pretending to be impressed. He nodded, then started scrolling through his camera. showing me pictures of other women, nude women, posed, seductive. Jason stiffened next to me, but before he could say anything, the guy smirked. "I need a girl who's not shy," he said. "A real professional. You're not one of those timid girls, are you?" I laughed nervously. Something about him was off, but part of me was flattered. I had always wanted to be noticed, to be someone. Then he leaned in closer. "I can make you famous," he whispered. "But your boyfriend? He's a problem. You need to lose him." Jason went to the bathroom, and the man used that moment to push harder. "He's holding you back. I can tell," he said, eyes locked on mine. "Come to my studio, alone, no distractions." My gut twisted. Every alarm in my brain was going off, but I smiled and nodded. I wasn't stupid, something wasn't right. "Do you have a card?" I asked. He waved the question away. "I'll call you. Just give me your number." I hesitated, but he kept staring, so I gave it to him. Jason came back just as the man stood up. They exchanged a quick, cold glance before he walked off. I could feel Jason's jealousy burning, but for once, I was glad for it. A few days later, I got the call. "Are you ready to be famous?" The voice was playful, teasing, but when I told him Jason wouldn't let me go alone, the mood shifted. "I told you not to bring him into this," he snapped. "You're not a child. Make a decision." His voice was harder now, less charm, more edge. I told him I'd think about it and hung up. Then I did something I should have done before. I looked him up. Nothing. No famous photographer, no studio, no agency. The school he claimed to work for didn't exist. I sat there staring at the screen, my stomach dropping. That's when my phone buzzed. A new message. A photo. Of me. Sitting in that cafe. Taken from behind. I hadn't even noticed. I blocked his number. I told myself it was over. But it wasn't. That night, as Jason and I walked back to our apartment, I felt it again. That creeping, crawling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was watching. We were almost home when Jason stopped to light a cigarette. That's when I saw him. Across the street, standing under a broken street lamp. The photographer. He wasn't holding a camera this time, just standing there, hands in his pockets, staring straight at me. I grabbed Jason's arm. "We need to go." Jason turned, saw the guy, and, of course, being the arrogant idiot he was, he didn't take it seriously. "You scared of some old dude?" he scoffed. "Jason, let's go." My voice cracked. I wasn't scared anymore. I was terrified. Jason sighed, but finally moved. We rushed inside, locked the door. I peeked through the blinds. He was still there, watching. But then, he smiled, turned around, and walked away. Jason laughed it off, but I couldn't. My heart was slamming against my ribs. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on our door. Jason froze. His eyes met mine. He wasn't laughing now. I swallowed hard and inched toward the peephole. Nothing. Just darkness. Then my phone buzzed. A message. "I like that red dress you wore last week." I wasn't wearing a red dress, not now, not yesterday, but last week. Last week I had. He'd been watching me. For a long time. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor, back against the door, phone in my hands, waiting for something, anything. Morning came. Jason acted like nothing happened. I wanted to call the cops, but what would I say? Some guy smiled at me. Some guy sent me a text. They'd laugh me out of the station. But I knew. That night, Jason fell asleep early. I stayed up, every muscle in my body tense. At some point, exhaustion won. My eyelids got heavy. Then, a noise. Soft, deliberate. The sound of a window sliding open. My body went ice cold. I turned my head slowly. The window by the fire escape, the one we always kept locked, was open. Just a crack. And in the darkness, a silhouette. A man, standing in my bedroom. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. A bright flash went off. A camera. Click. I screamed. Jason woke up cursing and flailing, but by the time he turned on the light, the man was gone. The window was open wide, the fire escape empty. The cops came. They took a report. But they didn't care. No fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. Just a scared girl and a boyfriend who didn't believe her. A week later, I got a letter. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Me, sleeping, taken from inside my bedroom. I left Los Angeles the next day. But sometimes late at night, I still hear the sound of a camera shutter clicking in the dark. And I wonder, is he still watching? Moving to Los Angeles wasn't part of a carefully thought-out plan. It was more like an impulsive decision fueled by a mix of youthful confidence and the desperate need for change. In 2009, I packed up my things, left New York, and landed in West Hollywood, completely alone. No friends, no connections, just the blind hope that I'd figure things out along the way. The only person I knew, sort of, was Josh. A mutual friend introduced us after he had interned at DreamWorks the summer before. He seemed like a solid guy, easy to talk to, fun, and just as aimless as I was. Josh lived in a decent-sized house with 3 other guys, splitting rent in one of those classic West Hollywood rentals that looked way too nice for a bunch of mid-20s dudes to afford. The catch? The landlord, Nathan Parker, lived in the guest house at the back of the property. Nathan wasn't like any landlord I'd ever met. He was movie star handsome with piercing blue eyes and a sharp, chiseled jawline that almost looked unnatural. The kind of guy you'd expect to see on a billboard in Melrose. But something about him felt off. I don't even know how to explain it. Every time I ran into him, he would look right through me, like he wasn't seeing a person but something else entirely. He never really smiled, and when he spoke, there was a disconnect. Like he was mimicking human interaction rather than actually engaging in it. Then, one night, I got a Facebook request from him, which was weird. My last name isn't easy to spell, so the only way he could have found me was by digging through Josh's friends list. I hesitated but accepted it. And immediately, the messages started. Nathan was relentless. "Hey, we should grab a drink." Then, minutes later, "I'll pick you up. You can crash at my place if you drink too much." That last part, that one felt deliberate. Like he wanted me to know that if I said yes, I'd be under his roof. I wasn't naive. I was young, sure, but not stupid. There was no reason this guy who looked like a Calvin Klein model would be this obsessed with me. A random 22-year-old girl new to the city. We had nothing in common, and yet he kept pushing. I trusted my gut. I blocked him and told myself I'd never have to deal with him again. I was so wrong. A few weeks later, Josh and I were drinking in his living room, doing the usual bullshitting about life, when he mentioned something weird. "Man, I haven't seen Nathan in a while," he said, swirling his beer bottle. "Like at all. Kinda weird, right?" I shrugged. "He probably found someone new to stalk." Josh laughed, but I wasn't joking. The whole thing still creeped me out, but the thought of him disappearing was almost worse. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the late-night paranoia. But we both got the brilliant idea to check out his guest house. We walked across the backyard where the moon barely lit the wooden deck. I expected the place to look normal, maybe a few lights on, a car in the driveway. But when we got there, something was wrong. The patio furniture was covered in old white sheets, draped like forgotten ghosts over every chair and table. And then we saw the stains. Dark, irregular blotches, deep red and brown, soaking through the fabric. Some of the sheets looked torn, like something had been stabbed through them. Josh waved his phone flashlight over one of them, and I swear to God, I could smell the iron in the air. I took a step back. My hands were shaking. "Josh, what the fuck is this?" Josh let out a nervous chuckle. Maybe he had a crazy hookup, some 50 Shades shit. I didn't even answer. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. Every alarm bell in my body was going off. "I'm leaving," I said. I don't want to be here." Josh still tried to laugh it off, but I saw the way his face changed when he got a whiff of the sheets too. We left without another word. I never unblocked Nathan. I never tried to find out what happened, but that night I had a feeling something was seriously wrong. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those sheets, those deep red stains. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe old wine, maybe rust, but I knew better. The next morning I called Josh. "Dude, we need to talk about last night." There was a pause on the other end of the line before he sighed. "Yeah, that shit was weird. Have you seen Nathan at all? Like, has anyone? Does he even live there anymore?" Josh hesitated. "I don't know, man. No one's seen him in weeks. I figured he was just off doing rich dude shit, you know?" I didn't. But something about this whole situation made my skin crawl. The days passed and no one saw Nathan. His black BMW sat in the driveway collecting dust, but the house itself was eerily quiet. No lights on at night, no sounds of movement. Then one night around 3 a.m. I woke up with a feeling. You know the kind like when you're being watched. I lived in a small apartment in Silver Lake, about 20 minutes from Josh's place. My window faced the street, and as I sat up in bed, my heart hammering, I swore I saw something move past the glass. I froze. There was no way. I was on the second floor. For a full minute, I just sat there listening. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no knocking. Just silence. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. The next day, I looked up Nathan Parker online. Nothing. No LinkedIn, no Instagram, no Facebook, besides the one I had blocked. The only thing I found was a business listing for his rental properties, houses in West Hollywood, Burbank, Studio City. No personal info, no photos, no past records. It was like he didn't exist. I felt sick. I couldn't explain why, but I knew. I just knew that something was terribly wrong. A few weeks later, Josh finally moved out. I visited his new place, a small apartment in Culver City, and for the first time in months, I felt normal again. That is, until he brought it up. "By the way," he said, casually opening a beer, "you ever hear anything about Nathan?" I shook my head. "No? Why?" Josh sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Cops were at the old place last week. My old roommate Chris said they were asking about him." I felt my stomach drop. "Wait, the cops? Why?" "I don't know," Josh muttered. "Something about missing persons. A girl who used to live in one of his houses just disappeared." My mouth went dry. "Did they find anything?" Josh shrugged. "Chris said they checked the backyard, but man, I don't think they looked hard enough." I gripped my beer so tight my knuckles turned white. I never told Josh about that night in Silver Lake. Never told him about the shadow I saw, the feeling I had, because deep down, I knew. Nathan Parker hadn't disappeared. He was still out there, watching, waiting. Life moved on, and I tried to forget about Nathan Parker. Tried to convince myself that whatever happened in that guest house wasn't my problem, but deep down, I never really let it go. A year later, I was having lunch with my boyfriend at this small, trendy cafe in Beverly Hills. It was one of those places where everyone was too busy pretending to be important to notice anything around them. But the moment I stepped inside, something in the air changed. I felt it before I saw him. Across the restaurant, sitting alone at a corner table, was Nathan. He looked exactly the same. Sharp jawline, piercing blue eyes, dressed in that effortlessly expensive way that screamed money. But the moment our eyes met, something twisted inside me. Nathan didn't just recognize me. He was waiting for me to look. His face didn't move. No smile, no expression. Just that same empty stare like he was studying me. And then, he tilted his head just slightly, like he knew. Like he was saying, "Yeah, I remember you." My blood ran cold. I grabbed my boyfriend's arm and whispered, "We need to go. Now." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I saw was that look. So I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I searched his name again. This time I found something new. An article from a local news site, buried deep in the archives. Property owned by local landlord under investigation for disturbing discovery. I clicked faster than I ever had in my life. Apparently, a renter in one of Nathan's properties had been digging in their backyard and found something buried. A pile of burnt furniture, a rusted-out safe, and clothing. Women's clothing. I felt sick. The article mentioned no arrests, no follow-ups. Just that police were investigating. But I knew better. Nathan wasn't arrested because they had nothing concrete. He was still out there, still renting houses, still finding new tenants. And I was just another girl who almost made the wrong choice. Almost. I never saw him again. But sometimes, late at night, I think about those stained sheets, about the girl who went missing, about all the other girls who might have said yes to a drink, a ride, a place to crash. I don't know what Nathan Parker really was. A killer? A predator? Something worse? I just know that if I had ignored that feeling in my gut, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. I used to think my job was easy. Good pay, flexible hours, and best of all, safe. It was a small event space in West Hollywood, tucked just a block away from the main strip. Fancy area, lots of foot traffic. Nothing sketchy ever really happened there. We hosted private parties, cooking classes, wine tastings, stuff like that. Most of the time it was quiet. Just me in the office handling bookings and emails while the chefs prepped for the next event. I never felt unsafe, not even when I was working alone with the front gate wide open. The place had this cozy vibe, warm lighting, polished wood tables, a fully stocked bar. It wasn't some dingy back alley spot. People paid good money to host events here. That's why when I walked through the dining room that afternoon and saw a man sitting at the main table, I didn't panic, not at first. I figured I must have forgotten an appointment or something. But as I stepped closer, something felt off. The guy wasn't dressed like our usual clientele. He looked rough, layers of dirty clothes even though it was scorching outside, hair matted and hanging over his face. And the smell. That's when I noticed what was in front of him. A butcher's knife. He was just sitting there idly spinning it between his fingers like he had all the time in the world. My stomach dropped. I stopped a few feet from the table, forcing myself to stay calm. Do not freak out. Hey, I'm so sorry, I didn't see you come in. Can I help you? My voice came out steady, but my entire body was screaming, run. The man looked up, his eyes dull but locked on mine. Then he smiled. I'm just waiting for a menu. Something about the way he said it sent a cold wave down my spine. Waiting for a menu. Like this was a normal restaurant. Like he was just another customer. But no customer plays with a butcher's knife like it's a damn pen. I forced a smile. No problem, let me grab that for you. I turned and walked, not ran, out of the dining room. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I needed to get out of there. Needed to get help. The office was in the back, but no way was I going deeper into the building with that guy sitting right there. My phone was on my desk, but the front door, just a few steps away. I made a choice. Slipping through the entrance, I stepped onto the sidewalk, keeping my movements casual until I was out of his line of sight. Then I bolted. The restaurant across the street was packed. Safe. I pushed through the doors, nearly colliding with a waiter. Call the cops, I gasped. Right now. The waiter blinked at me, confused. What? I turned, pointing back at the event space. There's a guy in there. He's got a knife. He's just sitting there. That got his attention. The manager overheard and grabbed the phone while another worker peered out the window. He's still there, they murmured. I didn't dare look. Minutes crawled by. Every second felt like a lifetime. What if he left? What if he decided to come looking for me? Then, finally, sirens. A pair of LAPD officers pulled up in front of the building. One of them, a tall guy with sunglasses, stepped inside. The other stayed by the door, hand resting on his holster. I held my breath. A moment later, the first officer reappeared, the man in tow. No handcuffs, no struggle, just walking, like he didn't have a care in the world. And as they passed me, he turned his head ever so slightly, just enough for me to see the smirk curling at the edges of his mouth. That smirk. It wasn't angry or mocking, it wasn't even threatening. It was knowing, like he was in on some joke that I wasn't. And that terrified me more than anything. The cops led him toward the squad car, but he didn't resist, didn't say a word. Just kept walking, moving like this was all routine, like he'd been through it before. I should have felt relief, but something wasn't right. I stepped closer to the officer still standing outside. "Hey, are you arresting him?" The cop, a guy in his mid-40s with a tired expression, sighed. "Nah, no crime committed." I blinked. He had a knife. He was just sitting there with it. "Yeah," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "But he didn't threaten anyone, didn't steal anything. It's not illegal to sit in a restaurant and hold a knife, as weird as that sounds." I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "So what? You're just gonna let him go?" He shrugged. "We'll take him a few blocks away, tell him not to come back. That's about all we can do." That's when the guy, the man who had been playing with a butcher's knife at my table, turned to me and spoke. "Next time," he said, his voice soft, almost polite. "I won't be waiting for a menu." I felt my whole body go ice cold. The officer's partner muttered something and nudged him into the car, slamming the door shut. A second later, they drove off, just like that. I stood there, my breath shallow, my hands shaking. The restaurant manager came over, asking if I was okay, offering water, a seat. But I couldn't move, because suddenly something clicked in my brain, something that hadn't registered before. When I first saw him, the front gate had been open, but the door to the event space, I was the only one who had unlocked it that morning. The thought slammed into me like a freight train. How did he get inside? I hadn't seen him enter, hadn't heard the door creak open. The front gate, sure, it was open all the time. But the door? I locked it every night and opened it every morning. The realization sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through me. Had he been inside already? Hiding somewhere? The kitchen? The storage room? The idea made my skin crawl. For days after, I kept replaying it over and over in my head. That smell. The knife. The way he said those words, so calm, so certain, like he was telling me something inevitable. I started keeping the doors locked during work hours, even when I was expecting deliveries, even when clients were scheduled. I never left the gate open again. Weeks passed, and then one night I was closing up. It was late, around 11 p.m. The last guest had left, and I was doing a final sweep of the place. The building had these big front windows, and if you stood in the right spot inside, you could see across the street to the restaurant where I'd run for help that day. I don't know what made me look, but when I did, he was there, standing across the street, in the shadows just beyond the glow of the streetlights, watching. My breath caught in my throat, my pulse pounded in my ears. He wasn't moving, wasn't coming closer, just standing there, staring. I didn't think. I just locked everything, every door, every window. I turned off the lights and crouched behind the counter, phone clutched in my hand. I don't know how long I stayed like that. When I finally worked up the courage to peek through the blinds, he was gone. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't sleep much for a long time after that. I quit the job not long after, moved to a different part of town, but no matter where I went, that feeling never left me. That feeling that I was still being watched. Because some nights, when I walk home alone, when the streets are quiet, when the air is still, I swear I can feel it, that smirk, that knowing. And I wonder if one day When I least expect it, I'll turn around and he won't be waiting for a menu. Welcome to Hollywood. This is a story I've never told anyone I know because honestly, I still cringe at my own stupidity. And yeah, sorry for the delay. This one took me a while to process. I was 16 when my mom and I took a trip to Los Angeles. If you grew up on movies and TV like I did, you know what that meant. Hollywood was the dream. It wasn't just a city, it was magic. The place where movie stars walked the streets, where Oscar winners held golden statues, where every inch of the boulevard felt like stepping into a film set. When we landed, I was buzzing with excitement. We hit Hollywood Boulevard first. Walking down the Walk of Fame, I imagined all the celebrities who had stood right where I was standing. We hopped on one of those big red tour buses, cruising past Rodeo Drive, the Sunset Strip, the Chinese Theater, the whole deal. And yeah, at first it was everything I dreamed of. But the longer we stayed, the more the illusion cracked. Hollywood wasn't all red carpets and flashing lights. It was also dirty sidewalks, people screaming at the air, guys dressed as Spider-Man asking for cash, and some dude arguing with a trash can. The whole place had this weird, grimy energy that didn't feel as glamorous in real life. But here's the thing. I kinda loved it. There was something raw about it. Something real. Hollywood wasn't just about fame. It was also a parade of broken dreams. And I was fascinated. That day, we had one last stop on our tourist checklist, the Warner Bros. Studio tour. Since we hadn't rented a car, we were relying on public transportation. There was a bus that would take us straight there, so we headed to a stop on Hollywood Boulevard, standing near a bunch of street vendors and people hustling whatever they could. If you've ever been there, you know what I mean. People selling maps to celebrity homes, fake VIP tickets, cheap sunglasses, the usual scammy tourist traps. We'd already gotten used to saying no thanks 100 times. But then, this one guy, he was different. Older, maybe mid-50s, wearing a faded Hawaiian shirt, a straw hat, and had shoulder-length gray hair that looked like it hadn't seen shampoo in a while. He locked eyes with us immediately, smiling like we were old friends. "Hey, you guys looking for a real Hollywood tour?" We shook our heads, gave the usual "no, we're good," but he didn't move. No, hear me out. You did one of those cheap tours, huh? They don't show you anything. I do the real deal. You ever touch the Hollywood sign? I can take you there." That made me hesitate. The Hollywood sign wasn't open to the public. No tours took you up close. But before I could say anything, he kept going. "You like Marilyn Monroe?" He grinned. "I'll take you to her real grave. They don't tell you this, but she's buried right in front of the sign." Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. My mom, being the polite one, tried to brush him off gently. "Oh, that sounds interesting, but we actually have plans." "I'll take you straight to Warner Bros. After. No extra charge." That was his hook, the offer that got us. And against every ounce of common sense, we said yes. As soon as we agreed, he grinned like he'd just won the lottery. Great, follow me, it's just down the street." And so, we walked. At first, it seemed normal, just another dude trying to hustle tourists. But something felt off. The way he kept looking back at us like he was making sure we were still following. The way he mumbled to himself when he thought we couldn't hear. Then he did something that made my stomach drop. He stopped at a ticket booth where a young girl, maybe 18 or 19, was selling those usual Hollywood tour passes. He leaned in toward her and said, loud enough for us to hear, "Hey, you know me, right? You can vouch for me?" The girl looked at him like she had no idea who the hell he was. She hesitated, then gave an awkward half nod. Yeah? See?" He turned to us, flashing a too-wide grin. "She knows me. I do this all the time. Best tour in town." I wanted to walk away right there, but my mom just smiled politely and kept following. We crossed the street, and he waved at a police officer standing near a traffic light. "Officer, hey, tell these fine folks I'm a good guy." The cop barely looked up, just gave the kind of non-committal nod you give when a weirdo won't leave you alone. And yet, we kept following him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we turned the corner, and there it was. His tour bus, only it wasn't a bus. It was a beat-up white sedan, old, rusted, cracked windshield. It looked like it had been sitting in the sun for decades. He turned to us, clapped his hands together. "All right, here's your ride. Hop in." I froze. I'm not sure what snapped me out of my politeness coma, but something inside me screamed, "No." My mom, though, she hesitated, and then she got in the car. She actually got in, and for one horrifying second, I felt like I was stuck in a horror movie, watching the dumb characters make the worst decisions possible. I don't know what came over me, but I panicked. "Mom, get out. Now." She gave me a confused look, but something in my face must have clicked because she reached for the door handle. And that's when Eddie got in the driver's seat and started the engine. My heart slammed against my ribs. I grabbed my mom's arm and yanked her out just as the car sputtered to life. Eddie's face twisted. He slammed his hands against the steering wheel. "What's wrong with you two? Why are you leaving? You scared of me?" We didn't answer. We just ran. I could hear him behind us, his voice rising. "I was gonna show you I'm trustworthy. Come on, let's make a deal." Then, by some miracle, our bus arrived. We didn't look back. We jumped on and collapsed into our seats, hearts pounding. As the bus pulled away, I finally turned toward the window. Eddie was still standing there watching us, and he was smiling. I was shaking. My mom was still trying to convince herself that Eddie was just another pushy salesman, just a guy desperate for a tip. But I knew better. Something about the way he looked at us, the way he kept pushing, the way he never actually tried to sell us anything, it didn't add up. And then there was his reaction. Normal people don't scream at strangers for walking away. Normal people don't chase after you demanding you get back in their car. I stole a glance out the window, half expecting him to be gone. He wasn't. Eddie was following the bus, not running, not waving his arms, just walking. Slowly, staring. And then he did something that made my blood run ice cold. He mouthed something. I couldn't hear him. The glass muffled the sound, but his lips moved, forming silent words. I swear to God, it looked like he was saying, "I'll see you later." The bus picked up speed, finally pulling away, and Eddie disappeared into the Hollywood crowd. For the next few minutes, we sat there in silence. I was trying to process what had just happened, trying to shake the feeling that I had just narrowly escaped something horrible. But I couldn't shake it, because something still wasn't right. Something we hadn't realized yet. As the bus rolled toward Warner Bros. Studios, I tried to laugh it off. "Well, that was insane," I muttered. "At least now we have a good story." My mom chuckled, shaking her head. "You're overreacting. He was weird, sure, but no one would do anything that crazy in the middle of Hollywood." I nodded, but something was still nagging at me, something that made my stomach churn. And then it hit me. I turned to my mom, my voice suddenly dead serious. "Mom, he never tried to sell us anything." She blinked. "What?" "He never..." I stopped, my heart hammering in my chest. "He never asked for money, not once." It was true. Think about it. If he was really a tour guide, why wouldn't he ask for cash before we got in the car? Why wouldn't he show us a price, a ticket, something? I swallowed hard. "And Mom, there's no way to get close to the Hollywood sign by car." Silence. My mom's face finally changed, like she was just now realizing it too. "And Marilyn Monroe?" I whispered. "She's buried in Westwood, not in front of the sign. That's not even..." I stopped myself, because I knew what I was about to say. Maybe he was just a creep. Maybe he was just some weirdo who liked messing with tourists. But maybe, just maybe, that was where he was planning to bury us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying it over and over in my head. The car, the way he stared at us, the way he never asked for money, and most of all, The way he had said, "I'll see you later." I knew it was stupid. He was gone. We were safe. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we had gotten way too close to something real, something we weren't supposed to walk away from. The next morning, while my mom was in the shower, I grabbed my phone and started digging. At first, I searched for Hollywood tour scams. Nothing really stood out. Then I tried missing tourists in Hollywood, and that's when I found it. A Reddit thread from a few years ago. Someone talking about a friend who had gone missing after getting into a stranger's car on Hollywood Boulevard. They were offered a private tour to secret locations, including a special spot near the Hollywood sign. My heart started racing. The user had posted a link to an old article. I clicked it. It was from a local newspaper about a man who ran underground Hollywood tours illegally. He had been investigated multiple times but never arrested. And then, one day, he just vanished. They never found him. No one knew what happened, but there was a photo. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. It was Eddie. The same shirt, the same hat, the same face. Only, the article was from 2009, and it said he had been missing for over 10 years. I felt sick. I locked my phone and sat there frozen, because if Eddie had been missing for a decade, who the hell was the man we met yesterday?